Well, thank you everyone for coming. We should have brought some more tables because you guys seem to be rubbing shoulders. So thank you very much for coming. Today is all about having a chat on what's really happening in the market. There's complex deals, things are tightening up, and we just want to have a chat and explore that. So I'm Max from Hermes Capital, and I'm joined with Nick Samios, who is the director and founder of Hermes. We've got Peter Johnson from Get You Loans, as well as Peter Lucas from Kestrel Solutions. So we're just going to kick things off, and I think what I'll do is I'll get everyone to introduce themselves by answering a sort of broader question about what's really happening and how we can and how sort of how things get tackled in the market. So I guess when it comes to operating in a different funding environment, say compared to a few years ago, there's a shift in where business owners and advisors need to understand, you know, raising and securing capital in today's market. What's changed, and how has that affected your business? And maybe explain a bit what you do, Peter.
Okay, thanks Max, and thanks for the opportunity. Peter Lucas, Kestrel Solutions. We're a consulting business really specialising in the turnaround management, profit improvement, strategy and business advising and coaching. So what I'm seeing in the marketplace as far as deals and people trying to get finance is, and I think mistakes people make is, they really don't have a plan in a lot of cases in the SME market. They want money, and I was at a meeting the other day where someone was looking to talk to an investor, and he says, you know, oh, we just need cash. Well, that's never just the solution. Cash is the blood of a business. If it's bleeding and leaking cash, if you don't plug the holes, the extra cash is just going to leak out. And you're not going to get finance because the financiers are much smarter than they probably were 20 years ago. They're looking more closely at deals, and Nick and that can talk about that. So they want to see what your plan is and what's caused the problems and what's your solution to your problems. Having a plan, having some forecasts that reflect that plan. Our planning process is very simple. Now, where, how? Where are you now? Where do you need to get to? Then how are we going to do it? And it can contain a one-page plan, which then can be supported by, you know, the forecast, and a three-way forecast to show, you know, what it really means in dollars and cents terms, but a real plan that shows of action of how you're going to fix your problems. And the funding is then part of it, or how, and it may not be a problem, it may be an opportunity, but you need funding. And you need that plan. That's, I think, a big mistake people are making, is not really having a well thought out plan.
Absolutely. I see that more and more often these days. Nick?
Well, I mean, as you know, Max, I mean, Hermes Capital is a lender in what we call special situations. We lend against assets, debtors, equipment and property in any combination. And we're dealing in these, we've always dealt in these distress scenarios. What I think the issue is, actually one issue that we're going to have, is that we've got a lot of people and we need some more chairs.
The seats are coming.
The seats are coming.
The seats are coming.
Yeah, okay. There are definitely seats coming?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's got that message.
It's very funny because we normally, did you say this already? We normally do this at 7:30 in the morning and none of you buggers turn up. And we thought we'll see what it's like at 8:15 and everyone's turned up. So sorry guys, there will be more seats. So just to get back to what I was saying, what I think Peter's touching on, what people know they need money. They want money. They think that money's going to solve the problem, and they're not asking, or their advisors should be asking, what is it you're trying to achieve? Right? The client says, I need $500,000. Okay, so if then you go, oh, okay, let's find you $500,000. The real question should be, well, what is it you're trying to achieve? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Is money the right answer? And if money is the right answer, what's the right money? Is it short-term money? Is it long-term money? What Peter and I were just talking about before. You know, actually, I was saying, like, if you finance, like, not that it applies. An example in consumer land is you don't want to be financing your overseas holiday to Europe with your new bride on a 4-year loan, right? Because like 3 months after you get home, all the good feeling's gone and you're still paying it off. But the thing is, people take that approach to financing their businesses. So, and what happens is when these things landing on our desk, because there's so much easy money around now, and I'm sure we've got a lot of brokers in the room here, which is, I guess, the general idea. But, and again, Peter and I were talking about this earlier, you know, the trouble now is, and actually Colin was talking about it before, the small business owner is sitting on their sofa at home going, I need money. And maybe instead of speaking to their broker or someone like Peter and finding out what the appropriate solution is, they're scrolling their Instagram feed. There's the, you know, and as quick as you can take the next sip of your cup of coffee, you got 200 grand. It's the wrong solution. Yep. And I can tell you now, the Instagram clickable fast money isn't asking, hey, wait a minute, Fred, what is it you're trying to achieve? And I think this is creating more problems for all of us. I don't know if I answered the question, actually, but I probably used up my time.
I think you took all my loop.
Nick, you always do. So, Peter Johnson, Get You Loans, just introduce yourself, and I also have a question as well tied in. So,
Sure.
What are the behavioural red flags that, let's say, Nick alluded to? What do you see most often?
Yeah, good question. Peter Johnson, Get You Mortgage Solutions. We get a team of 8 brokers across Brisbane and Noosa, but most of the brokers in the team are pretty much residential. I do mainly unsecured and secured commercial funding for businesses. The question around red flags is probably, Peter just used the word plan before. The opportunity to obtain funding is substantially easier in an unsecured format now than it ever has been, which sounds crazy given how much the right lenders are tightening the reins. The wrong lenders are available, as you said, at the push of a button on an ad or, Facebook or Instagram or something like that. But the red flags for me as a broker when I'm looking to try and find a lender or find, cash, as you said, Peter, I think the difference between how I see the cash component of it versus how they actually a client actually approaches me with it is when they say cash, I hear lifeline. I hear I need a way out, I need a chop out, I need a bit of assistance, I've got a short-term pain, I've got a lack of strategy is generally the problem. So if they're coming to me looking for funding, the three main criteria that I'm obviously looking to try and fit into that is what's the money actually for. So if they're just saying cash flow, generally the more you dig, there's a little bit more to that than just cash flow, obviously. It's quite easy for someone to come up and say, I need money for, the ATO or wages or payroll's going to be a big one come July 1, But there's a reason that they need the money, and that might be that they've won a job, they've had to put more staff on. There's going to be a shortfall over a 3 or 4 month period that they need to bridge in some way, shape or form. Or it might be that they want to expand their business. I don't want to try and run myself dry while I'm trying to expand and put another 8 blokes on. You see that quite a lot in civil construction. They win a big job and they think everything's going to be hunky-dory because they've built 25% into their margins, but they've actually got to get there. And then they've got to float the 60 days between when they finish the job and when they actually get paid for it. So if they know what they actually want the funding for, that's a really big green flag for me. If they just say cash flow, as Peter said, generally speaking, they don't actually know what they're trying to achieve. They just know that they're short on money and they need it. So usually by the time that they're saying cash flow, it's normally at a very close to too late status, which is when your biz caps and true caps of the world come into play, because it's a sugar hit. We refer to biz cap, and there is a place in the market for biz cap. I don't begrudge people of using them for necessary components. But the biggest thing that I talk about as the second part of this is exit strategy. So if there's a lending criteria that BizCap fits and you don't have a lending strategy, generally speaking, an exit strategy, generally speaking, it makes your situation worse, not better. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. And I guess you see more, I guess compared to 3 years ago, do you see more of those get quick money now, not solving the problem?
500% more than what I did 3 years ago. Yeah. I doubt you guys would see a credit file that doesn't have an inquiry to BizCap or TrueCap or Capify or any of those types of lenders. And again, I don't begrudge businesses.
Can we just call them Quick Cap?
Quick Cap.
Because we do want to be able to use this video. Yeah. I don't want to get sued.
Other short-term cash flow lenders. I think the thing about it is, if I had looked at a credit file 5 years ago, you'd be surprised to see that inquiry on there. Now you're surprised if it's not on there.
Yeah,
that's probably the difference.
Yeah, and I guess when it comes to risk, transparency, credit confidence in today's market, where do you most commonly see, Nick, brokers or let's say borrowers lose credibility in the credit process? There's so much information flying around, it's hard to really even own a client as a broker because clients seem to want to jump around. Where's the break apart? Where do things fall apart in the process?
I think one area that we're seeing things fall apart is these days, and I've got to be careful what I say here because obviously brokers are the lifeblood of our business.
Absolutely.
And there's a few grey-haired ones around here. I know I'm not going to upset them. Ian's looking at me very sternly, worried about what I'm going to say. But in the old days, you know, you would have a client, you'd build a relationship with that client, you've gone out to see them, maybe you financed the first car, and then you've developed a big relationship with that client, and you know, I've always said the great thing about being the broker for 10 years or 5 years, whatever it is, you're still there. They've had 5 bank managers and they didn't know any of them. But the broker's built that relationship. But what's happening today is particularly, you know, we're seeing a lot of lead gen, you know I go onto my Facebook and there's always someone there going, hey broker, I'm not a broker, I don't know, but hey, you know, we'll get you more leads, you know, and how could you handle another 15 leads a month, you know? And the trouble with that is that it's not relationship building, and it's not that the broker isn't presenting the right information. Because they don't have the relationship, they don't know what the right information is sometimes, unless they're doing the old school deep dive, going out to see the client, what we used to call in the old days belly to belly meeting. And so the client is withholding information, or not necessarily, they're just not giving you the full story. And so it reminds me of when you're in a legal fight, you know, and you realise that the person on the other side hasn't told their lawyer everything. And the lawyer's running down, and it's the same. The broker hasn't been told everything.
Yes.
And then that then makes it hard. You know, so I encourage people, I am old-fashioned, I encourage people to get in front of their clients. And that way it'll also make that relationship a little bit bulletproof when the client is surfing and looking for someone else. But I think that's the problem. It's hard getting. Now, of course, we've got these days you can plug into the accounting system and plug into the bank statements and all the rest of it. But there's still a lot of the story that's not told by any of that. And it's the lack of relationship that's a problem.
Yeah. Which is really due diligence, right? Like a broker's got to do his due diligence as well. I mean, he needs a lead, but it also comes down to, you know,
I think
spending that time.
Look, I think due diligence is correct, but that sort of it suggests that someone's not doing something that they should. It's relationship. You know, I think that as we get into AI and all the rest of it, relationships are going to become more valuable. That's where you're going to build your value add.
Yeah. So I guess when you've got the client, Peter, due diligence is a big thing.
Yep.
So what does sophisticated due diligence really look like when you've got a client? You're looking, you've opened up the hood. You know, it's more than just looking at financial statements.
Certainly is, and before I answer, is there any actually accountants in the room? Good.
We can offend accountants.
Because, yeah, the financials are important, but what I think isn't emphasised enough by the accounting profession, and I am a chartered accountant, is that the accounts and the profit are a byproduct of the activities in the business. And businesses are about people. So I think the sophisticated due diligence, and in our work we've done a number of due diligence exercises or been part of due diligence teams. You've got to look at the business model. Does it make sense? You've got to get out to the business, as Nick said. I love getting out and seeing the business, walking around, getting a feel for what the business is looking like. How tidy is the factory or the warehouse? How well stocked is a retail store? Those things are important. Getting to understand the management capability. 80% of small businesses fail within 5 years. It's two things: undercapitalised, and also what I call lack of capital management skills. The management capability is so important. Getting to understand it's not just the owner; it's who else is in there. They're really important. Where's the business sitting in their marketplace? Do they have actually a competitive advantage and a point of differentiation? Getting to understand those things is part of the due diligence. So do you understand if you're going to lend them money, is this really going to work? Or are you just putting, filling a gap? And a lot of these quick online financiers are just filling a gap. And, I've seen it from the other side of my business, I'm also an insolvency practitioner, where I've had 4 or 5 of those sort of lenders, all on the books. Unsecured, huge interest rates, and they've just lent the money. Where the sophisticated and the good lenders are actually digging deep, doing a deep dive in the business to really understand it, to know that it's a good lend. And there's an exit, how they're going to get their money back. So I think that's what they're really looking at,
I think that sometimes by doing the due diligence as a lender, you actually lose the deal because there's other lenders out there that won't do it.
True.
And they win the deal, and obviously they've got the rates that they are to recover just in case.
That's true, but you start looking at your bad debt ratios, etc. And the good lenders, there's the old saying in lending, if you don't have any bad debts, you're not lending enough. But it's getting the balance right, isn't it, Nick, about not having too many bad debts. And these quick financiers are going to have a lot of bad debts.
Yeah. So, Peter, when it comes to, I guess, you've got concerns and then you've also got confidence in a business. So when it comes to presenting to a funder, what are those sort of the green flags and let's say the red flags, concerns, confidence, markers in the business that funders like, and approaching it? How do you as a broker approach the funder to make sure that just because there's a concern, it doesn't absolutely kill the deal? Yeah,
good question. You keep coming to me third, so the boys are stealing all my good gear. But look, there was a part that we just had a conversation there about bad debt, and I just want to touch on that for a second. The business models of the lenders that we're talking about, where there's a large unsecured portion of it, generally speaking, it's based on bank statements. There's a revenue component that they're using, which is basically everything for them. Their business model doesn't matter that bad debt occurs because they're making enough money while the payments are coming through that when they do have to write it off, generally they're in front anyway. So, and they know that, at those 30 and 33% interest rates and the 40% interest rates that they end up getting back, that they're probably going to have more losses than they do wins in the end as far as whether that debt actually gets paid out. But if they can make enough money along the way, it doesn't matter. So when we talk about, those unsecured lenders, they look at one line, and that is what's the revenue look like. Whereas if you're going through I just want to touch on something that Nick spoke about, which is truly the most important part of this. If you've built a relationship or a rapport with the client that you're dealing with, you know their business, you get to know their business and the way that it operates, and the things that aren't written on paper are probably the most important aspects of it. How a business functions, how they plan for things, are they strategic in the way that they go about things, do they have a strong CFO? I know we talked about there's no accountants in the room. that's a really big factor that I look for. A CFO within the business that actually knows how it operates and where the money's actually going all the time. Most of the time, you know, I'd say everyone in the room here, when we're talking about this sort of product, we're not talking about professional services. We're not talking about doctors or accountants. We're talking about tradesmen normally. You know, a lot of the time we're talking about businesses that are in construction or plumbing or electrical or, you know, roads or, you know, mining, all of those types of really high volatile entities where there's, you know, 30-day terms everywhere and things like that. So generally speaking, revenue isn't an issue. So looking at the bank statements doesn't really tell a story. You know, if you don't have enough revenue, you're going to find that out pretty quickly. And when you go to do anything with this client, the issue that you're always going to have with low revenue is that the business might not actually be viable. So generally speaking, doesn't get past the first hurdle that it needs to anyway. So the things that I look for after I know that there's a viable business there, which you can do very quickly through, you know, asking for the right documents, have they considered what they actually want to utilise the funds for? Is there a plan? Are there good people in the right places of that entity? And then are the numbers actual or are they inflated? You know, one of the biggest things in financials is obviously the ability to make a business look better than what it actually is. You know, so genuine revenue versus expense rather than just what you can see on the balance sheet or the profit and loss. So if you do those things diligently, and you know, Nick and I were having a conversation earlier, a good business versus a bad business, shouldn't say bad business, a performing business versus a struggling business, the quicker that you can identify that, the quicker you can find out whether or not you're going to be able to provide funding for the requirements that they have. A high-performing business is coming to you proactively to actually engage in the next steps in their business, whereas a struggling business is coming to you using that word, which is cash flow, you know, that Peter talked about earlier. If they're just looking for cash, generally speaking, the planning scenario has already failed. So this is then, you know, how can we straighten the ship? You know, does it have good bones and we just need to get this business back to its feet again? And that comes with a strategic plan. So, you know, if I give a deal to Hermes and they're still with Hermes in 4 or 5 years, generally speaking, and Nick could probably attest to this, we probably haven't done the right thing by the client, because they should be trading to a different level at some point in time out of a Hermes type product. You know, cap raising is there for a bridge. It's the next step in progression for a good business that's heading in the right direction. So,
Nick, any thoughts to open the Hermes Bank?
No. No.
Just
question?
No. I did just want to touch on, just to go back to you just quickly,
Sure.
Which is that there's a lot happening in the world, especially now, you know, with the whole tax changes. Is that a confidence hit? Have you seen it trickle yet? Has it appeared at all?
I certainly have in residential. I know that much.
Okay.
In small to medium enterprise, no. I don't really think that it's made it. I mean, it's obviously very early. The budget was released last week. Time will tell. But right now, the changes that were made last week, I think, are going to hit the average mum and dad more than they are the SMEs of the world. Certainly, the high-performing SMEs are sitting there thinking twice about buying investment properties. But from an actual business perspective, I don't really think there's going to be a lack of confidence in how, you know, lenders approach things now as opposed to a week ago. I think that, as I said, from a residential or from a secured portion, I should say, you know, commercial property, residential property, there certainly will be some significant changes over the next 12 to 18 months. But I think as far as, you know, what we're discussing here today, which is business lending, financing for the purpose of either growth or, you know, consolidation, I think that things will probably get tougher. I think that lenders want more stable environments from their clients. But I think at the bottom end, like we've just talked about, I think that there's going to be a really aggressive approach from volatile lenders to try and take advantage of that. So it'll be a minefield if you're a small to medium enterprise in the next 12 to 18 months. It'd be a minefield trying to avoid that quick sugar hit for sure.
And there is pressure, and everyone's trying to navigate it. The question that everyone, or I guess the solution that everyone jumps on is debt. But is there anything, Nick, strategic capital-wise, maybe bringing in partners or something? Is that something that should be explored more, or do the business owners just want to keep having their baby and own all of it rather than share it?
Look, I think that firstly, I think it's interesting what Peter just said with respect to residential. I think that will flow through to small business, given that a lot of small businesses are funded by mortgages on their homes. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, getting back to to strategic capital, it's going to be interesting to see how these capital gains things play out. You'll have less incentive to fund your business with equity, I think. More incentive to do it with debt. But I think fundamentally though, whether it's debt or whether it's equity is still asking, I think, the wrong question. Sometimes I think you're better off asking Peter the question as to what is the problem that this business has. I mean, very often, and I see it within Hermes, people will come into my office and they say, this client needs money. Why do they need money? Because there's an ATO debt. That's the problem. The ATO debt's the problem. No, the ATO debt's not the problem. Why do they have an ATO debt? Well, they had a big customer that went bust. Is that the problem? They had a big customer that went bust. Well, I'd be asking, well, what was their credit processes like? Looking at Patrick, what was their, why did they bet the house on that big customer? Is there something more fundamentally wrong with the business that they had to sort of, swing for the fences with a big customer that they knew maybe, or they didn't want to find out more about their credit? And so it's a question. So as I say, the presenting problem is I need money. Why do you need money? Because I've got an ATO debt. But the real problem, you need to solve that problem. They're going to need some funding, but they need to be they need to be fixing the fundamental issue in their business, which is possibly being more competitive, so they don't have to take those big swings and the big gambles on the projects for those developers or customers or whoever it might be that other people are turning away. It's a little bit, again, like I say in my business, we get this terrible deal comes in, and I say, well, do you think you got this terrible deal because you're a great salesperson? Or could it be that nobody, and it could be, you can imagine a civil engineering business, and the guy comes in, I've got this, it's a $5 million project with Busted Co. Proprietary Limited. And you go, well, mate, we've got that because nobody else is doing it. So then the question is, to Peter's point, if all you're doing is got ATO debt cash, ATO debt cash, ATO debt cash, they are still going to be with us in 4 or 5 years' time, and nothing's been solved. On the other hand, if we're financing them, getting them from, okay, you're in a hole now, but you're going to fix the business, so you've got better credit procedures, you're being more competitive on, or maybe more discerning on who you do work with. I don't know how many times you guys have met someone who says, I only deal with the blue chips now, I've learnt my lesson. Yep. If that's being fixed at the same time as they're getting the cash, they won't be with us in 2 or 3 years' time because they've fixed the business and they don't need us anymore. And Peter's gone and refinanced them with Judo, Westpac or NAB. And that's a great outcome.
Your clients, they come to you. What is the main or the most common symptom that you see? The pressure, I guess.
The pressure points.
Yes.
Look, it's probably a combination of things, and I've presented a lot around early warning signs of business failure. I think it's like a lack of understanding. I've been doing what I've been doing for 45 years, and I've got to say the majority of people that have come to me are fundamentally good at their trade or their profession. They're good plumbers, they're good dentists or whatever. Their management skills and business acumen is where they're lacking, particularly in the SME space. And where do they get that? They get it from talking to their mates, they maybe have some networking, they get a bit from their accountant, maybe they've got a business coach who may have some experience or whatever. That's a real key to understand. As Nick been saying, tax debt. I've presented to chartered accountants at conferences, and I asked the question about early warning signs. I say, put your hand up if you've got clients that are on a repayment plan with the tax office, and they all put their hands up. I say, take your hand down if you've got a plan of fixing the business. And very few hands go down. Now I say, tax debt is a debt that is due and payable like any other debt. The problem is, we don't get a service from the tax office, like the landlord or employees or your suppliers, right? So everyone, and for as long as I've been around, and probably ever since Moses was a baby, and the taxes have been around, it's always been thought as a bank. We pay it when we have to, and we resent having to pay it. But it's a debt that's payable any time. So the question is, why doesn't the cash flow of the business allow you to pay your debts? Is it a temporary problem? A bad debt, maybe a delay in getting payment? Or is there something fundamentally wrong with your business? And business owners don't want to face up to the reality, because in the SME space, the sad reality is that often the owner is the problem. And they need to take ownership of the fact that maybe they're not. And that's where sometimes a strategic capital and business partner can be very helpful. But getting the dynamics of that right can be extremely difficult. So I think, that decision for capital is hard, but it's sometimes absolutely necessary. So I start looking at what the fundamental problems are in the business, and is the business owner willing to get it. I sacked a client a couple of months ago.
Did you give him 30 days notice?
No. Well, actually gave him about 15 days notice, but they pulled back what they wanted me to do, and therefore a lower fee. But I reviewed their 6 months figures, $3 million turnover, 300 grand loss. And I've done this report. They've got this $10 million contract coming up over 2.5 years. Ask some simple questions. What have you factored in for material price increases? What have you factored in for subcontractor rates going up? What have you factored in for labour cost increase? When I got a response, it took them 2 weeks to respond to me.
Wow.
They didn't answer the questions. And that's when I went back and said, I'm not responding. Then the owner wrote back to me and said, I got your report. I didn't read it because I didn't want negativity. Okay. One of the fundamental things of the business owners, of any of this stuff, you've got to face your facts.
Yes.
And you've got to understand the brutal facts. As Jim Collins said in his book, Good to Great, you've got to face up to the good and the bad and the ugly, and really face the brutal facts. And if you're going to get money, and you want to get money through Peter, or for your clients finding the money, and you need Nick for a short period of time, you've got to face the facts, and you've got to have the answers to the questions that these guys are going to ask, because they're going to ask the hard questions. And it's what it's about, really fundamentally getting to understand, and then having a plan of how you're going to fix your problem. And hope, I was on a call yesterday, hope is not an answer. Maybe belief is a better word to use than hope, but belief, you need a plan. Hope is just a dream. Hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, and more and more often now, I think that we seem to always find a commonality, which is it's getting the director, or it's getting someone in management on board. If they do come on board and they do want to face the facts,
yep.
Just when it comes to picking debt versus equity, is there more, I guess, acceptance to bring on an equity partner these days, or is it still? I
think there's still a real challenge.
Yeah.
There's a real challenge about giving up control, and what does bringing an equity partner look like, and getting an agreement that's going to last. You know, is there going to be a shareholder agreement? How rigorous is that going to be? And I'm advising one party in a shareholders dispute, and it's very one-sided, the agreement, etc. So it gets complicated.
Sounds like a prenup.
Yeah, well, it is like a prenup, really. You know, it's a marriage. You're getting two people into business together. It's like a marriage. I remember when I first moved from Sydney to Brisbane, one of the partners of the firm I worked for, he said to me, you know, you spend more time in the office than you do with your wife. So that can be a reality. Your business partners, you can be spending more time with than your life partner. So you've got to get on, you've got to know. And you're not going to always, you know, when you start getting into business together, you're all in love with each other. It doesn't last all the time. There's hiccups, and you've got to be able to deal with that. And I've often done a lot of work. I had a client for 13 years that I did a turnaround on, stayed on, 2 directors, and I was able to be their confidant. They could tell me and whinge about the other one, knowing I wouldn't go and tell unless we've discussed it. And I had a client 13 years. Only reason not a client is because we sold the business at a really good price. So getting that often is the way forward, but getting the original owner to recognise and understand what it's going to look like can be a real challenging part of the exercise.
Yeah. And just back to costings.
Yep.
Subcontractors, price of materials. That's really just realistic cash flow management. Is that a lost art these days?
I think to a lot of extent. I think people do their costings at a point in time, and they sit there and they think. They are making 20%. And I'll give you a quick example. Business did office fit outs. I got asked to go and they were in trouble. He said, oh, you know, we make 20%. And I said, do you actually go back and compare your actual costs to the quote? No, we haven't done it. We pulled 11 contracts out. 1 contract was break even. 1 was profitable. 9, they lost money.
Wow.
So he wasn't making 20%.
Wow.
So that management of the actuals compared to your quote, and understanding and revisiting, because costs change. Costs change, particularly currently. Someone said to me the other day, I think that in less than 10 years, the cost of building a house has doubled. So if you're not keeping up to date with what your costings are, and therefore what you need to be charging, you're going to be quickly in strife.
Wow. Peter, question for you. Got to show you some love. When it comes to making practical change in today's environment, what is, I guess, a list of a few things that businesses can do right now to improve resilience, to at least have a positive outlook over the next 12 months?
Yep.
You mentioned CFO, so maybe a virtual
Yeah,
CFO
structure.
or something could
Yeah,
work.
I think structure. I think when you hear all of the things that Peter has to say, I'd be interested, Pete, is the business that you were talking about, are they in civil? The one with the margins where they weren't making any money on all of their jobs?
Oh, they went bust.
Yeah.
They went liquidation.
Yeah.
It was just an old job, probably 20 years ago, but it always sticks in my mind.
Yeah. Financial planners, advisors, accountants, brokers, the crux of, if I was sitting with someone that was about to go and start up a business today to try and get themselves, if they believed that there was an area in the market that they had an opportunity and they had the skill sets to do it, and they were setting a business up now for success, the most formidable component of it is a strong structure within the team. Because if you don't have, I think it might have been Nick that spoke about it before. Oh no, it was Pete. Said that, these guys are really good sparkies, plumbers, builders, whatever that they are. You set them in front of a computer, they don't know what the bloody hell's going on. So it's if you've got a business that has 50, 60, 70 staff, or 30 staff, and you're on the tools, your business is going to fail. If you're on the tools every day as a plumber running a plumbing business with 30 staff in it, your business is going to fail, because there needs to be management of the business day to day. And if you want to be on the tools, you need to employ a general manager.
Yes.
You know, you might want to be that plumber that stays on the tools even though you've got this business because you've got the great relationships. That's fine. Employ a GM. You know, employ someone that's going to look at the business day to day. I've got a business that I do a lot of dealings with based down in Victoria, and the two guys that went into business with one another were one ran an excavator company, one ran a heavy haulage company. And they were one was a really, really good truck driver and knew how to set the routes for all of his drivers, and the other one was a really bloody good digger. And 2 minutes into the conversation with them, I said, guys, we need someone that's going to look at the business every day. Because you don't know, they didn't know the numbers, they didn't know, they know that they had plenty of work, but they didn't know where the money was going, or what was happening with it once they got their bills paid. Why was there no money in the account every single week? Why were they always strapped? As Pete said, there wasn't enough margin built into things with expenses and materials and labour hire, and old mate that's charging you $80 an hour on the digger has decided to charge $160 for the 4 hours of overtime that he did. And all of a sudden that's actually sent you backwards on your, on the job itself. It doesn't matter what sort of small business, medium business over the next couple of years, or at any point in time, if you don't have the right people in the right places to manage the business, it doesn't matter how well the business performs as far as the jobs, it'll always end up in a shit fight. For lack
If
of
I
the
can
professional
quickly add to that, one of the keys as a business owner is to really understand where your strengths are. And just because, in this, coming back to that guy, he was a great salesman. What he needed to do was get out there and keep selling and have either a very good CFO or a GM that looked after the day-to-day operations and the finances, etc. So he could go out and do what he was really good at, which was selling. So small business owners got to really understand their strengths and play to their strengths, and then bring people in, either full-time, part-time, or as advisors, that covers and protects them from their weaknesses.
Yeah. And to answer the question more pointedly regarding what you actually asked, the way that lender confidence gets improved from that is when the lender is asking the questions relating to the business. We can answer them with confidence. That you're not a deer in headlights when that question comes in. Well, how are you going to reduce that? Why is there such a shortfall there? What's the plan with this? If there's answers to those questions, I know sitting with a big four bank immediately, if there's answers to those queries that come from a credit assessor and you've got strength in those answers, it doesn't really matter what's in the financials.
It's all about the story, right?
Of course. I mean, they want serviceability, so they're always going to look at the bottom line at some point in time. But if there's a strategy and there's a plan, you're much more likely to get the deal across the line than you are if you're just depending on numbers.
Nicholas? What is the secret to structuring complex deals in today's market? You see them all the time, you see them every day. What is it?
Well, good question, Max. Thank you for asking that. Let me answer that question with a bit of an example, okay? And I do think there is a formula for structuring a complex deal. The first thing is, as I said before, you need to find out what the client's trying to achieve. So, for example, we had a client in West Australia. They were in structural steel, and they got sick and tired of being burned on structural steel projects. They were pretty good at doing steel coating and painting on projects, but WA, you've got mine sites and where the stuff erodes quickly, and so they wanted to transition their business where they were getting burnt all the time from structural, steel fabrication to coatings. So that's what they're trying to achieve. Now, okay. So the next question is, well, what are your funding objectives? Do you need term debt or revolving debt? Well, we needed some term debt because the way the business had gone, we needed to refinance some of the term debt that they had. So there was that element that needed to be structured as a term debt. But as they were transitioning the business, they were going to need working capital. They've been using the ATO. And so we needed to replace that. We put in some debtor finance to do that. So the first question is, what are you trying to achieve? The second question is, what are your funding objectives in terms of term and revolver? And then you've got to look at what are the repayment sources going to be? Now, hopefully they've done all the things that these boys have been talking about doing, and they're going to lift their profitability, you know, cost their jobs properly. And so some of the cash flow to repay the debt is going to come from the cash flow of the business. But sometimes it might be, well, because we're transitioning the business, we're downsizing, we're just changing, we're going to sell off some fleet, or we're going to sell off that warehouse we don't need anymore. And so, okay, well, some of the cash flow to repay this debt's going to come from an asset sale or an equity partner. We can structure that into the deal, right? So then as you're structuring the deal, you're thinking about, we've got an amortising component, we've got maybe there's another loan that is going to reflect the fact that it's going to be repaid from an asset sale. And then it's a question of looking at, obviously you need to be aware of what security is available in terms of debtors, equipment, whatever other support there might be. So you can then match, you know, the profile of the deal, the working capital elements, how that deal's going to be structured, and these are the things you need to. As I say, at the first level, what are you trying to achieve? Very important that the funding is split into term and short term, right? Term and revolving, because too much we're seeing a whole bunch of these little short term loans. They're not solving the problem, or the alternative. The alternative is where there's a working capital requirement, and I'm sure that this is the bane of your existence as well. Someone's come in and done, there's the easy short term, but there's also the easy mortgages. And someone's had a working capital component, and they've gone and taken a 3-year fixed mortgage. And I think you were saying before, what you called it, coverall. You know, all of a sudden, all the security's gone. The problem hasn't been solved. There was a working capital problem, and so these things, you need to match the repayment. You need to understand what component has to be revolving, what component's going to be fixed, and that's how you structure a deal.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And even these days now, when you see the short-term lenders, what we've identified is that fixed short-term money, or let's say that first or second mortgage, really just pays a creditor, which has really already done the work. So you're not going to get, you know, you want to borrow $1 to make $5, let's say. But in this case, you're borrowing $1 to pay $1 that's already made you the money. It's probably been paid already. You're not going to get any value out of it. So it's really got to structure it properly.
I always say we want to provide funding on Monday. Mm-hmm. The last thing you need is on Thursday, the client's ringing up, so I've got no money for payroll. Exactly. You know, and I've got lots of wise old sayings, you know, as I've gathered the years.
Comes with age.
Comes with age. Thank you, Peter. He's got a lot of grey hair on his head. He can say that. Is that we want to solve the client's problem, not the bank's problem, mm-hmm. right? Now, obviously, sometimes solving it, right, but if all you're doing is taking a bucket of money and, as you said, paying the ATO or paying that creditor that's screaming or paying the bank, and there's no, what Ian likes to call, walking around money afterwards, then how are they going to lift themselves out of the situation? How are they going to address those fundamental things that we've been talking about? All that's going to happen is that they've solved someone else's problem, and again, another wonderful saying that I have is, I want to solve your problem. I don't want to become your problem. Mm-hmm. Because if all I'm doing is solving the bank's problem, the bank's not a problem anymore. I'm a problem.
I do want to rebut slightly on that.
Please.
There is a need in some. There are components of that there will be a need where that dollar for dollar, a dollar in, a dollar out, yes, is a necessity. And whilst it might seem like it's kicking the can down the road, sometimes buying time gives them the ability to go and make that $5 from that dollar. So there's plenty of brokers that probably nod their head when I say that, and I saw it straight away as soon as I said it. Whilst the ideal situation is that you're leveraging something in order to grow and get better and sometimes, you know, create revenue from that debt, there are instances where the revenue's fine and this is just a moment in time. We need to put some things on pause. We need to put some things on hold. We just need to give ourselves 2 months. We need some breathing space. And that, talking to a client yesterday, which is a Hermes client, and Nick and I worked really diligently on to get the deal across the line. That person needed time. He needed space. As a really good business, but with the debt crawling in and no ability to think about what he's really good at. If your whole mind and your whole capability as a business owner is put into how do I survive the next 2 months, how do I pay the next bill, then you don't actually do what helps you to generate revenue and grow your business and get it into a better spot. He can put his head on his pillow every night thinking about what the next day looks like from a revenue perspective. That's what Hermes has generated for this client. So what Hermes gave him is not necessarily going to generate more revenue from the dollars that they gave him. What it's created for him is the ability to function without worrying about what the next day looks like from a debt perspective. He now has a stable work environment with a really good, strong facility in place. It doesn't give him any more money than what it would be giving him if he was getting paid by his debtor. It just moves that debt slightly down the road so that he can continue to operate and hopefully create the revenue stream to generate out of it. And that's exactly what it's like.
I would agree 100% with you. There's money doesn't solve problems.
No.
And I'll tell you what else doesn't solve problems. Voluntary administrations don't solve. I mean, like it's the same. I'd say the same. A voluntary administration doesn't fix the business. Money doesn't fix it. Both of them do one thing, is exactly what you said. They buy time. It's all about buying time. And then it's a question of what you do with that time. That's what the thing is.
Yeah.
So I 100%, it's all about buying time. And then if you don't use that time, then you cactus.
Yeah.
But if you use the time, and that's again, I go back to it, that quick hit, Instagram money, whatever it is, it doesn't ask the right questions.
Usually it's kicking the can down the road,
Yeah,
right?
well, it doesn't ask questions.
Yeah.
The only questions that goes is which bank account do you want me to send the money to?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would disagree slightly about the voluntary administration
Well,
process
of
because
course
it can, but it can. And I'll give you an example. I was administrator of a asbestos removal demolition business, and in a 10-week period, we grew the business from 25 to 75 staff and made over $1 million profit after my fees, simply because they won some work, some government work without having to tender because they were already on site and found more asbestos that needed to be removed. But we put the systems in place. So unless the administration process is actually driving change to the fundamentals of the business, I agree. But when you start driving change as part of the process, and that's why a lot of small business restructures, the business are going to fall over because they're not the change happening in the business, fundamental change. And that time can be important to allow the change, whether it's through a formal process or through safe harbour or just through a turnaround, informal turnaround process. The change is what's gone wrong, how we're going to change it. That 13-year client, we did our profit improvement process, that saved the business. Because what I call 3 E's that don't appear as line items in your P&L is efficiency, effectiveness and engagement. And that's where there's often the problems, and people think they're running a really good, efficient business. We go in there often and they come to me and say, we're stunned by what's coming out. The change and the improvement that is potentially in a business is enormous, but sometimes you need time to be able to extract that and implement it.
What's the percentage of businesses where you do engage in an SBR or a DOCA or voluntary administration? Do you know the numbers on the businesses that come out of those and then go on to be successful versus those that fail?
I don't know. I don't think there's any stats that sort of look at that long-term success.
In your experience, though,
my experience, where people actually embrace the change, and you've got a fundamentally good business, it's pretty high.
Yeah.
The trouble is about people actually fundamentally changing. I gave an example at a meeting yesterday. A retailer, menswear retailer here in Brisbane, I did administration of 20 plus years ago. We changed and said to him, one of the fundamentals besides weekly stock takes was every sale had to have a gross profit of a certain percentage. We did that, paid 100 cents a dollar. 2 or 3 years later, I go in there to buy a suit, 50% sale. I buy a suit, a couple of shirts, and I said in that process, if you give a belt or a tie at less than cost, we live as a bundle sale. I said to him as we were dressing it, Paul, how much profit did you make out of this sale? He said, oh, Pete. I said, have you followed the rules? He said, oh, absolutely. So he got some fundamental things going right, which he continued on. And that's the big problem. They won't necessarily continue on. That's why sometimes you should be keeping people on that's helping them out of the problem, just as an advisor, to keep them and accountable.
There's so many businesses that think that that administrative component to it, or a small business restructure or a DOCA, means the end of leverage from lending. I had a client come to me 4 months into trade and they're turning over $1 million a month. What's the first question that I ask? The business has been open for 4 months. First question that I ask is, did you have a business that you were operating before this one, and what did it do? You know, and sure enough, it's a mining business that's gone into mining in the wife's name. It now operates in the wife's name. It was operating in the husband. The wife's a managing director of a mining company and doesn't know the difference between, you know, a pipe and a wrench. So it wasn't too hard to tell that there was a Phoenix entity. And the second that you talk to a lender, that they're just going to, you know, cross it off the list straight away. Whereas if there's been a strategic involvement of an administrator, or a DOCA's been taken out, or a small business restructure's been, you know, taken out, yeah, you're going to wipe some ATO debt potentially, and they'll let you, you know, eradicate some of that debt. But it's not a death penalty for funding.
Absolutely
and
not.
it's you know, it's something that I've had to play in that space quite regularly over the last 2 or 3 years, and you know, with the right strategy and the right lenders, you know, those businesses go on to be, as you said, they make the necessary changes. And
Embracing
go on
change.
to be successful.
That's what it is, embracing change.
And the sooner they recognise their problems and get help, the prospects of survival is so much better.
Yeah.
I think that there's some people in the audience that have questions for us, so I'll just open the floor to anyone who has any questions for Nick and Peters. Well, that's all good, because that
You
means
answered
that they
everything.
answered absolutely everything. Yes.
Something came out in previous breakfast in Hyman that said that the endemic problem with value of business is the data and the profitability. And the problem I find as a broker when you get a stressed business is the accountant's not going to rely, you can't rely on what accounts do. So I think utilising someone like Peter, or services like Peter's, where you can bring an independent, you've got a much better chance of finding out quickly where the business is and more chance of getting it funded. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is that, you know, when you're talking, I was saying to Peter again, I mean, like, you know, in our world, you know, we only see businesses that have got some level of trouble, whether it's a lot of trouble or a little bit of trouble. And, you know, very often the reason that they're in trouble is because they're not doing their accounts properly. Or if they are doing their accounts, as Peter said, they don't want to know the bad news.
Well, that's the point, is that you can't, you know, he has point to valuing businesses and you can't get the data. And broadly, what we're getting given is rubbish.
Well, at the moment I'm butting heads with everybody involved in a particular client of ours. Because I'm trying to get them to get someone in to do the books, right? And, you know, I've got one of their advisors saying, oh, I'm a terrible person because I want them to get their book. I'm saying, how can they run their business? And, oh, no, we're going to be selling the business. Well, who's going to buy the business? Okay, now, I'll tell you who'll buy it. It's a business that's very heavy in a particular kind of asset. I don't want to name it because I don't want anyone to work out what I'm talking about. You'll end up selling it for asset value, right? You won't get any goodwill because there's no way of determining. So yeah, you'll sell the business at maybe at best you'll get the OLV value of the assets because anything above OLV reflects goodwill, and that is a problem. Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned about the involvement of these people. They're really good. I've got a client who's a really good rainmaker. He can generate the opportunities, but it's a $3.2 million hobby, so they do put a zero at the weekend. That's,
I'd love one of those.
That sort of thing. And it got to a point where I was actually given a permanent login to the Xero, and I said to her, 3.2 million bucks. Imagine you want someone's payroll, and you're getting paid that's your gross salary before deductions. How many hours a week do you think you're going to have to work for that employer? She went, oh, that's an 80-hour-a-week job. Funny that. Oh, I see what you're trying to say. So it's about the involvement that these people have, and then they get caught out.
We'll wrap up now. I just wanted to let you know, before all of you leave, there are booklets, little guide booklets on structuring complex deals. Nick has, it's the black booklet like that, yeah, and please feel free to grab them. They're all yours. And once again, just thank you very much for coming.
There's a good step-by-step for
Yes.
structuring a complex.
And if you don't want to go through the step-by-step and read anything, just give me a call. So.
All the Peters,
All the Peters, absolutely.
great job, Max.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.